going through a review or an introduction for some of you. Grandfather addressed radiance. You know, it's funny because as I look back, he used the term energy practically from the first week that I met him. You know, it's like during one of the classes, somebody had written in, a longtime student, that she doesn't remember me ever discussing or alluding to radiance and the glow of things and stuff like that. And I read the feedback and I said, oh, really? Every time I've used the term energy, I'm talking about radiance. When you bend a fire, essentially it's radiance, it's energy. When you do a healing, it is energy. Every application that requires energy is radiance. And Grandfather didn't name it until the very, very early 60s. I was about 10 years old at the time. And I remember he had mentioned radiance and he trying to fumble for a word that would fit his, translation from his tongue. And I looked at him and I said, oh, like an aura thing. And I have to laugh at his reaction because it was like he had a turd in his mouth. Seriously. It was like, no. And that was back before aura became a cliche, where everybody used it. But he mentioned it, he said to me and Rick, he said, do you ever notice religious paintings of saints, of Christ, Mary, Joseph, the Buddha? And he went through all of these mandalas and everything else. He said, what do they have around their heads? And I said, like a halo. He said, that's radiance. And he said, the reason that you don't see it usually around their bodies in a painting is because the deity or the saint or whatever else have clothing on. He said, even the Egyptians and the Mayans depict sacred people, sacred figures with this same glow around their head, which people today think, oh, they're space helmets or something. No, they're radiance. It's radiance. It can be felt, it can be seen, it can be heard. Anyway, it's funny because I think it was the 60s, and I think the guy's name was Carulian, developed a photography that actually could take pictures of people's aura. Now, forgive me, because sometimes I slip and use that word aura. I'm talking about radiance. And I actually had several sets of these different prints. For instance, there was one of this healer who was fairly well known, and I used to show them to philosophy workshops and stuff. It was kind of neat, where the healer's hand would be on the photographic plate and you'd see the beautiful outline, the electrical signature, so to speak, of that hand. And then through a series of photographs, that that healer would go into the healing touch, and you'd watch suddenly that hand begin to glow. The radiance around it would expand until the last, it was totally whited out. It was amazing. And then a series of fingerprints also doing the same thing. And you could see, for instance, a person in a great mood. Their aura would be vibrant and alive, and in a sad mood or a depressed mood, it would just be like imploded. They found that with disease and injury in cerulean photography, there is a lack or a diminishing of that radiance, aura, in their words. People that tend to have dark thoughts and deeds tend to show a negative, or what they call a black aura. Radiance is in everything. As Cerulean began to develop his photography, and it went even to movies, so to speak, full images of people, and his equipment became more sophisticated, he found exactly what Grandfather said. There are layers to the radiance or aura. Dave, I'm going to the board here a second. In other words, if you were to take someone's head and shoulders, forgive my artwork, there is a radiance aura that is closest to the body. That Grandfather defined as core radiance. But as I said, as their equipment became more sophisticated, more sensitive, they found, yes, there is that core radiance, but there's also bands of radiance. And to date, they have found 3 distinct bands. There's actually 7, but 3 distinct bands of this radiance. The core radiance, this right here, is like the radiant signature, meaning no two people, no two things have exactly the same radiance. It differs slightly. It can be felt, it can be seen, heard also. That core radiance is in everything. You know, when they were first developing this cerulean photography, they just dealt with people and sometimes animals. Well, they were very surprised when they found that everything, rocks, drops of rain, trees, insects, you name it, has radiance. Everything has radiance. Now, for those of you who are seasoned vets at the tracker school, it sounds very similar to sensing presence now, doesn't it? Very similar. In that everything has presence, quote Grandfather, even thoughts and emotions, which many of you have proved out. When you were learning to sense presence, you could feel, sense the change in your partner as they slipped into a sad mood, or they just reversed it and got into a happy mood. When Grandfather said, when we were learning to sense presence, he warned us, don't try to figure it out, or you'll lose it. But what he said is, don't try to figure it out yet. The yet didn't come till a couple of years later, when we started to embark on radiance, then we realized what in fact we were feeling when we sensed presence. And we were sensing presence for a few years, but when radiance came into play and we finally could define it, touch it, see it, it formed a power and a communication that absolutely stunned us. Another question people ask is, how does radiance relate to your critical edge and your threshold, for those of you who have had that? Is it part of it, or isn't it part of it? That's the question. The answer, yes. It is and it isn't. It's got, I can't get into it now, but we will in a couple of days. The critical edge and threshold are independent. Radiance moves within them. Generally, according to Grandfather and according to what you're going to find this week between yourself and your critical edge, is your first 3 bands of radiance, and then beyond that is the remaining 4. How far does that reach out? Well beyond your threshold, let's put it that way. But that's way ahead of myself right now. Again, everything has radiance. Everything. Radiance is very fluid, very moody. It's layered, like concentric rings. Some people will see radiance in color when they do eventually see it. That's fine. But keep in mind what Grandfather said about color and radiance, that it is prejudicial. It's interpreted through you. What one person sees as red, another person might see as lavender. That being said, it's not very reliable on the onset. As you get more skilled at it, you learn to set aside prejudice. You'll find that you come through a color spectrum that is redundant for everyone. But in the beginning, it's all over the map depending on the individual. So set color aside right now. In fact, it's best to just use the degrees of white or light at this point with radiance. When a person begins to develop an understanding of radiance, you first feel it. Soon to follow is actually hearing it. But it's not hearing with the ears, it's more an internal hearing. It's much like taking a fork and banging it on a hard table, and as it vibrates in your hand, touching it to your tooth. Years ago, they had a speaker system that they marketed called the bone phone, which actually laid around the neck, and the part of the speakers lay on your collarbones. So not only could you hear the sound, but you could feel it. Like somebody beating a bass drum passing in a parade, you feel it deep and visceral. And then finally, after a while, you'll actually see the radiance. Though, I had some Coyote Thunder members that they could feel it, they could hear it, they could sense it, but they just had a difficult time seeing it. One of them just passed away a month ago tonight, full moon tonight. But he did very well only feeling the aura, the radiance. Radiance approaches to everything, so changes everything that you do, your perception, your understanding, your success rate, things that you've done in the past that your success has been mediocre. When you bring in the element and understanding of radiance, suddenly things get crystal clear. Success goes through the roof. Now with this foundation of radiance being laid, we can move on to the next step. But you know what's funny? There's a visible form of radiance that everyone can see. The name of it is St. Elmo's fire. It's funny, when the atmosphere is in the right condition, and it especially happens at the swamp at camp. There's a couple of big old cedars down there that do this frequently. When there's like mist in the air, and it's one of those nights where the air is kind of still, but still there's little puffs of movement in the air. All of a sudden, you'll see a tree glow. Glow so much you can almost read by it at night. Sailors on the masts of ships would see the St. Elmo's fire glowing. That's where it got its name. That electrical charge, that which they photograph in the Carolean photograph, that is radiance. But at its most apparent under those conditions, what you're going to do is feel it, sense it, see it under all conditions, day and night. In fact, many of you that have taken the philosophy workshop, it happens generally in philosophy 1 to a lot of people. You're out midweek, it's at night. The visual distraction is now out of the equation. And you're sitting there quietly in your sit area and you're in wide angle vision. All of a sudden you notice around trees and a faint outline around brush, there is this like halo of radiance. And that's where people generally see it the first time. They get deep into their spiritual mind on that journey, that meditation, whatever. And they look out in that wide angle vision. They're already in that point of surrender, and all of a sudden the woods is like illuminated. That is where most people touch it for the first time, see it for the first time. Now, many of you can get outside. Now, if you can get outside and get to a tree, something substantial like that, it would be perfect. If you can't get outside, your next option is exactly what Grandfather had Rick and I do. You can feel your own radiance. Now, when you do this, when I ask you to do this exercise, simply be in a semi-state of surrender, not fully surrendered so you're completely a clean slate, so to speak, but just all the garbage that normally goes on in the back of your head, just let it evaporate. Allow your hands to become very sensitive Then go out to that tree and stand there for a few moments looking at that tree or whatever in wide angle vision. It doesn't have to be extreme wide angle. It can be ratcheted down to about, a 45-degree angle or whatever. Then take your hands as you keep that tree in the middle of your vision and slowly bring your hands in, becoming hypersensitive to your entire hand, so that my knee here, as if this was the tree, you'd be coming in like this, and then suddenly you're going to start to feel the core radiance. That is the strongest of all the radiance. It's your fingerprint, so to speak. For those of you who cannot get outside, just simply take your hands and touch gently. You'll feel it. I mean, it's photographable. It's a electric field. It's a lot more than that, but in our culture, that's the best to understand. That you can feel. All you have to be is sensitive. Now, for those of you who are veterans, start out a little further and see if you can feel the layers. You should pass about 2, maybe 3 layers with your sensitivity. Again, if you can't get out, use your knee, or better yet, if you have a sympathetic partner, somebody at home now who knows you're a screwball anyway, as they sit there, just bring your hands into the sides of their head. And when you do this to another person, you're going to feel it stronger. Trying to detect the radiance on yourself is a little bit difficult, and that's, I think, why Grandfather had us use our knee to begin with. And then we went to the tree, because it's a little more difficult to feel your own radiance, because there's actually radiance coming from your hand also. But again, if you have a sympathetic partner, use them. You veterans become hypersensitive to this, more so than you ever been, and start feeling the layers. Now, some of you might be surprised that as you do this, even you folks who have never done this before, you'll almost see, as you're doing this and you make contact, the tree glowing. Or if it's in a dimly lit room with your sympathetic partner, the glow around your partner's head, the classic halo effect. If it happens, great. But open yourself up when you feel this radiance, because it has a sound to it, a quality that's translated through your touch deep within you. If you can't hear it right off, don't worry about it. That will come. Ironically, and I don't know why this is, Grandfather never fully explained it. I have a thought about why this occurs, but generally, people can feel radiance first, shortly followed by hearing it, and then eventually seeing it. At first they see it at night, and then they start seeing it during the day. A lot of my ghost talkers, my physical spirits people, are seeing it during daytime. It's a little bit more difficult with all the visual distraction and harsh light, but it's a combination of both seeing, but also sensing through sight. All right.